Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Ukrainian talk show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and today we have following panel. We have uh, first of all Professor Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Then we have Ivan Kucherenko from Kyiv, Ukraine. Welcome to the show, Ivan.
Hello, Sasha. Hello, everyone.
And for the first time in our show, we have Professor Roman Sheremeta. Welcome to the show, Roman.
Thank you. It is my pleasure.
Great to have you. Okay, let's start with situation in Ukraine on the front line, and not only front line, but elsewhere. How people feel about this situation, what you've heard, Ivan, on the streets from your friends, what's the overall feeling in Ukraine?
Thank you for the question. Generally, the morale of Ukrainians is still pretty high. We are struggling because we have no other way either than to fight with the Russian invaders, and we still believe that our Western partners are helping us. And for today, I have a really nice video from a battlefield from Avdiivka region, which is one of the most difficult regions of the strongholds in the eastern part of Ukraine, and Russian Federation is trying to capture Avdiivka for almost 2 years. For now, it's another Bakhmut for them. So let's see this video.
Yes, please.
And discover what's happening there.
Just in front of us, we can see the notorious Coxsahim plant. Obviously, we're approaching the city of Avdiivka, which is now the hottest spot of the Ukrainian front line. We were told to keep our windows open so we can hear anything that flies towards our direction, let it be FPV or plane or anything. And we are planning to meet and talk to several soldiers who are defending Avdiivka at the moment.
The battle for the city began on October 10th, when Russia launched a massive offensive from 3 directions. North, around the city of Stepove, and towards Coxsahim, the largest coke production plant in Ukraine. East, via the main road leading to occupied Donetsk. South, via the village of Vodine. The goal, to encircle and capture Avdiivka. And also to draw Ukrainian resources from other parts of the front line. Due to Russia's continuous use of mortars, artillery, and large glide bombs against civilian targets, access to the city center is restricted for media. So we travel to the outskirts to meet with those who are summoned when the going gets tough, Ukraine's Special Operation Forces. So far, the city is holding. The situation is stable but extremely tense. According to US intelligence, Russia has already lost more than 13,000 personnel along the Avdiivka-Novopavlivka axis. Godzilla, an SOF operator, has witnessed the fierce battles firsthand.
After we started pounding them, they changed their tactics slightly. The statistics provided by the General Staff reflect the reality, I can assure you of that, and Russian prisoners of war will confirm the heavy losses. It's safe to say they are advancing right over the bodies of their colleagues. Once their equipment and personnel thinned out a bit, they divided their units into smaller components and began assaulting from different directions.
While the fighting is heavy everywhere, the Coxsahim coke plant has become the heart of the battle. Russia is sparing no cost to capture it.
It's quite possible that they perceive Coxsahim as their second Azovstal, something sacred to them. Perhaps that's the case. Or it might be a political issue, that's very likely too. To take Avdiivka, to take the plant before the 2024 elections.
Just like before, Russia is relying on seemingly endless resources. both in terms of machinery and human life. Griffith is responsible for interrogating newly captured prisoners of war. He has shared videos of men they recently captured in Avdiivka.
These new batches of conscripts and contractors typically represent society's lowest. What I mean is, due to a shortage of qualified resources and citizens subject to conscription, this year, Russia launched an extensive recruiting campaign for contract service, typically motivating individuals with money. These are people who face imprisonment, people in debt, individuals who haven't found any fulfillment in life.
Работал с марта этого года в ЖЭКе. Денег мало было, ну, как бы, жена, ребенок. Ну, и она говорит, надо уже менять, ну, как вместо работы, денег не хватает.
Literally those without homes or alcoholics from the streets.
Сначала сработал уже, безработный, бухал, потом и пил на место. И так как-то пошел в военкомат, сразу, в же день на комиссию пошел.
Still, relying on large amounts of poorly trained conscripts can work. Every single enemy soldier is a problem for the Ukrainian army. And while the world was focused on the Ukrainian counteroffensive, Russia was gathering men in the hope of turning the tables with offensives like Avdiivka. Still, Godzilla and Griffith have no doubt that Avdiivka will hold.
For a while, we focused more on attacking. So perhaps in some areas, we didn't think about defense as much. But now we see that we need to work in all directions. We have to understand that this is war, that this is the front line. It can shift, with us making slight advances in some places and pulling back in others. But overall, we're maintaining our defense and doing it successfully.
As 2023 is coming to an end and the war is entering its third winter, Ukraine's future remains uncertain. The battle for Avdiivka shows that Russia isn't becoming weaker, it's growing stronger. So only an even stronger Ukraine can manage to secure freedom for its people, and for the rest of Europe alike.
Thank you so much. It was really a very good video. And Jonathan, I would like to ask you a question. It's very important to understand that there are several views on this war and two opposing views and strategies. And this is for you to evaluate both of them. One is that the West, United States, they achieved their objective in this war. Russia is essentially you can go as far as to say that they're ruined. They will not be able in next probably 10 years. They need to rebuild their army, their infrastructure, their production of weapons and so on. And therefore, it's time to, would be nice to have some kind of a peace, but at this present situation, it's impossible. So all Ukraine has to do is to simply hold on their positions, to continue killing as many Russians as possible. It's very crude suggestion, what I'm offering, but essentially that's all what there is to it. You can call it by any other names, but the even some people like, for example, famous Arestovich, he says exactly that. All you do is just keep killing as many Russians as you can. So if Arestovich can afford to say so, maybe I also can afford to do so. And another doctrine is that Ukraine slowly has to accumulate resources, get more weapons from the West, first Western Europe, NATO countries, then United States, hopefully sooner than later, and eventually to prepare the attack to sever the front line on south, and then have complete access to Crimea, not necessarily even taking over Crimea, but just to have it available for taking over anytime they want. And so this will force Russia into some kind of negotiations and much less favorable conditions. So these are two things. Uh, is it possible to combine them into one, or they are two separate directions?
Well, Sasha, to answer your question, both of those views of strategy have a considerable degree of truth to them. They do not necessarily represent the complete and accurate picture. The missing element, from my perception, is that nobody is really talking about Ukraine making a surprise operational move that will change the battlefield significantly. And the one that seems to be most overlooked yet acknowledged by certain quarters is, of course, Ukraine's success in uh, driving the Russians out of control of the Black Sea, and also their steadily increasing success against severing the link, the logistical and reinforcement link between Russia and Crimea. And I've been contending all along that this is the real uh, under the radar type of success that the Ukrainians are very close to achieving. And it is my opinion that the Ukrainians may pull yet another operational surprise within the next few months, which could in fact sever that operational link between Russia and Crimea. And if the Russians lose control of Crimea, that is a significant operational defeat, which the Russians will be unable to disguise or explain away. And this changes the whole complexion of the war, and then reinforces Ukraine. That success will reinforce Ukraine's ability to successfully remain on the defensive and accumulate better qualitative resources for resuming the offensive perhaps sometime in 2024. Again, so the explanation of the two strategies, they are not mutually exclusive. Ukraine can remain on the defense while counterpunching like a skillful boxer, wearing down their opponents. That's the best analogy I can use at this point, because Ukraine is successfully wearing down and counterpunching the Russian armed forces. And I would be curious now, Roman. I'm not trying to surprise you or anything, but I'm interested in your unique perspective and standpoint of would the Ukrainian people be able, and do you think them capable of pulling off an operational surprise against the Russians, contrary to the expectations of most of the so-called Western experts who think that the whole war is stalemated?
Well, it's a tough question. I'll tell you honestly that when I'm in Ukraine and whenever I speak to Western experts, so people like you and me who spend most of the time not on the front line, we are more optimistic than the Ukrainian generals themselves. So, for example, if you speak to General Zaluzhny and his, basic commander officers, they will be much more reserved and they would not make such claims. But when you speak to people that, Ben Hodgins or General David Petraeus or David Baldwin, these are the retired U.S. generals who can freely speak, not on their behalf without any repercussions, because they're not an active service military, but they're much more optimistic, and so there's this this course, and there's this kind of gap between the view of the Western expert and the view of the people on the ground. And I would tend to believe more people on the ground, right? So we from the West, we can be more optimistic and we can afford it. But people in Ukraine who are fighting this war firsthand, they have to be much more realistic and much more cautious. Now, that being said, there are some significant advancements that could be made due to delivery of F-16 and really changing the aerial superiority. That could happen because F-16 do have an advantage over Russian airplanes because of the longer radars and the longer range missiles, but we still need to see how that is going to play out. So I would be more cautious in my expressions. Now, in terms of the how the war is going to develop, I do think that the West is making a huge mistake by believing that Russia has lost the war or has been drastically undermined, because what Russia has done, they are trying to mobilize and increase their production. What the war has shown to them, if anything, is that they need a bigger war apparatus. They need more equipment. They need a quicker production of artillery shells. They need to have a more advanced drones like Landsat that have already been beaten even American equipment in terms of the quality, quantity line, and the price target as well. So the point is that Russia is gonna and they already put their economy on the war rails, and we as the West, we cannot afford Russia to take any Ukrainian territories, because any concessions on our side will be viewed by Putin as a victory, and that will just embolden him in the future aggressions, because he's
I
done
agree
something.
completely.
Yes, he didn't achieve his full-fledged goal, but he achieved something. And the next time the time comes, he's going to do it again. So the only way to truly stop Putin is Russia's complete retrieval from Ukrainian territories. Now, when, how will it happen? That's a different question. But I think the view that the West somehow achieved some sort of objectives by stopping Russia, that's a very narrow-sighted view, because that's not how Russia is operating. That's not how Putin is operating.
Roman, then I would like to ask you this. There is a very popular thought that obviously right now there is a war of attrition.
Yes.
And the war of attrition can be decided by one of two things. One of the sides, their will to continue the war will be broken. Right now, it's not happening. Both sides are adamantly resolved to continue the war and to win the war. So that one is out, at least for foreseeable future. The other one, that's becoming tricky. The other one is that one side tremendously increases its production of weapons, getting, more sophisticated weapons is important. But it seems to me Russians showed us that even if they have all kind of Second World War weapons, the tanks T-34 or whatever older, they're still weapons. They can still shoot and kill people. So whether you have modern weapons or not so modern, the difference is not so great. There is a difference, of course, because it provided that both sides have equal amount of weapons, and one are modern and another are not, so the modern weaponry will decisively win. But that's not the case, because Russians are building all kind of obsolete 50 years old weapons, but a lot of them. And Ukraine, it's not getting even what was promised by the West. It's not getting there, or it's getting something, but much later than it was supposed to be, or so on. So in this case, at least at this point, we can say that no one has advantage, because unfortunately, Western weapons, hopefully they will arrive, but they haven't arrived yet. And Russians keep producing all kind of garbage, but it's still viable and can kill people. So there is, we are saying that there is no stalemate. There is still possibility to enhance position. I agree with that. On the other hand, what I've described is something indication of at least partial stalemate or so. Jonathan, what do you think about this?
It's a stalemate that has basically been forced by what you are talking about, by the lack of speed with which Ukraine is being supplied with the more modern weapons that it needs. And this forces Ukraine to adopt a defensive posture, and at the very most counterpunch where they can to disrupt Russian operations, to disrupt their logistics, and hopefully create what I believe they hope to create is a situation where finally there is a critical vulnerability say, for example, in the operational and logistical link between Russia and Crimea, where Ukraine can decisively strike and break that link and inflict a visible major operational defeat on Russia without risking its forces overall in a general counteroffensive, which would be, at this point, without sufficient Western weapons, would be rather problematic. And at the minimum, the Ukrainians would have to regain air superiority over Ukraine, which they do not have at the moment. Right now, it's about air parity. And so, really, until Ukraine gains that operational air superiority and has sufficient qualitative weapons from the West, from various NATO members, they're coming in the not most organized fashion I've ever seen, but they're coming from individual NATO members. Hey, we'll supply you with this, and we'll supply you with this. And now all of this turns on the Ukraine's ability to absorb the aid that it does receive from individual NATO members and how skillfully can they integrate that into their defense, counter what the Russians are doing, and then hopefully set the stage for a surprise blow against what they see as a critical Russian vulnerability. It's more of a waiting game than a true stalemate.
Jonathan, remember one of the reasons, there is a theory that one of the reasons why Germany lost Second World War is that they had supplies from too many European countries. For example, the car from 15 different countries.
They never had. You're correct on that, especially in tanks. They never had. They never settled on one tank design, and maximize it. They had the closest they came was the Panzer IV, which was not their most advanced tank, but they produced over 5,000 of them during the war. That was the closest they came to a standard main battle tank, but it was inferior to their Panthers and their Tigers and their King Tigers, but they were never able to settle on one standard design and produce that in maximum quantity. And
John, you said 5,000. Do you know how many Russia produced tanks during the Second World War?
Oh, it was a lot more than that.
We're talking about
T-34s were tens of thousands.
Yeah, exactly. In that case, I'm afraid Ukraine may have some logistical problems when they will have supplies from so many countries. Not that I'm not against the supplies, but they have to be mindful of logistics, how to quickly repair them and absorb them, and so on. Ivan, what do you think about this theory that Ukraine should dug in as a positional war or war of attrition is concerned, while still preparing, maybe not in next month or two, but eventually preparing some kind of a attack most likely, I think, on the south of the country?
As far as I know, we're already doing like this, and on the majority of all directions already we're digging in and building fortifications, not only on the territories close to the battlefield, but also on the territories which are bordering with Russia, with Belarus, because unfortunately our problem is that the majority of our borders is close to our enemies, unfortunately, to Russia, to Belarus, who is an ally of Russia, and to occupied territories by Russian forces. And as for the preparing for the next steps, I've heard recent reports from the Ukrainian Defense Intelligence Agency that all of those attacks on Crimea, especially on military bases in Crimea, they are part of one big plan. And of course, nobody will tell us about this plan and what it consists of, but we're sure that our military command is know what they're doing, and they're preparing really interesting plot for our enemy. So I hope that in near future we will get some really nice news from Crimea. As far for now, they have pretty big problems with their air defense there. They can't intercept Ukrainian missiles. They can't intercept majority of Ukrainian drones. And recently, the military base in near Sevastopol was attacked, and it was reported that military base was a general communication node, special communication line with the Kremlin, and it was being destroyed by that successful strike. So really some interesting things are happening in Crimea, and hopefully in near future they will bring better result for us.
Roman, I'd like to ask you about in one of the interviews of Zaluzhny, I think to The Economist, and he said that his mistake was that he thought that eventually Russians will lose so many soldiers and generals and officers and so on. So eventually there will be kind of a desire to not either stop or finish this war or whatever do, just to preserve their capital, although they have in 4 or 5 times more people available than Ukraine, but still they lost already 320,000 people in less than 2 years, whereas in 10 years in Afghanistan, they lost only 15,000 people, and it was one of the reasons that Soviet Union ceased to exist. So with 320,000 and keep growing every day, almost 1,000 people are being killed or maimed in Ukraine. Do you agree with this assessment of Zaluzhny that he never believed that they can withstand such heavy losses?
Well, yes and no. I mean, Zaluzhny knows what he's talking about. The thing is that Russia has always been, Soviet Union has always been fine with the big losses. We know this from the World War II. We know this from any other conflicts when Russians would lose accounts of millions of people, and they would sacrifice millions of people for a stupid and unreasonable goal, right? So we know this, that this has never been, human resources never been a question for Russia. Now, on top of that, there's 3 things that I wanted to say. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it's really a question of economics, right? The bottom line, Russia has 3.5 times more population than Ukraine by different estimates. And when you first reach out to conscript soldiers, you just pay them money. And Russia has more of those, it's a relatively poor country as well. So basically, they can pay them significant amount better than the market rate, and they can still have enough supply of Russian soldiers to the front. So that's the second thing. You know, there is enough volunteers in Russia yet, enough volunteers to continue the offensive. And the third thing is that when Russia is mobilizing their forces, they're not mobilizing them from St. Petersburg or Moscow or some of the big cities. They go on the outskirts. It's in a way of genociding their own people, but the minorities, right? The people on the outskirts of Russia, that nobody's going to care about them.
And don't forget jails too.
From jails, right? I wanted to say that as well. From prisons, and those are not the elite of Russia. So that's why. Even though we're talking about hundreds of thousands of soldiers killed and wounded, those are not the somebody that is on the forefront, and Russian people would go on strikes to stop this. So these are the 3 factors put together is one of the reasons why Russia is not backing down, and maybe the hopes that Zaluzhny had and others are not materializing.
I totally agree with you. And speaking about jail, they're sending all hardened criminals and killers. They're not sending political dissidents, of course. And so actually, there are more and more people even one-man demonstration to end the war could lead you right into the Russian jail. Now, the jails in Russia are becoming empty slow. So when Trump will become a president, Putin will make deal to outsource Russian jails for American criminals. And because
Oh, don't want to touch that one.
Sasha, don't advise a nice election point
No.
to Trump, because I think
Don't let him hear about that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, very interesting question. Right now, there is this hearing whether the President of the United States is immune to prosecution. And while it still has to be decided, but in case that they will decide that, yes, he's immune to prosecution, then United States will be no more a republic. It will become a kingdom. And Trump as well can become a king. And if that will happen, then Putin will announce himself a king of Russia. What do you think about this possibility, Roman?
I don't buy it. I mean, it's the America is not ideal. I mean, we have a lot of problems here, and admittedly, we can see that. But at the same time, it is a democracy. It is a long-standing democracy, and the Trump's wishful thinking is not gonna work. Plus, we are states, right? So there is 50 states. Each state itself is a little country, if you will, and there is laws. And as you've seen, that Trump has been taken down from the ballots already in some states, and potentially in many more states. So that Republican structure of the United States will ensure that we have democracy standing. And now there is some constitutional issues, obviously, with the how to prosecute the president, and because the idea of the decisions that were made on behalf of the country by the president should not be prosecuted, because those are the decisions that sort of, on behalf of the country. But then the decisions that were made not on the behalf of the country, and it's then those decisions can be prosecuted. So there is a question, how do you separate the two? And this is the legal battle. I'm not an expert in this, but I figure out it's a difficult call.
Yeah, agree. It's very interesting. I was listening prior to this program. I was listening to these arguments of lawyers and the judges on this his immunity situation. It's quite interesting. And I think that American people, in their wisdom, collectively will understand that even the question of his participation in insurrection, and some people believe that yes, he was participating. Actually, he was ahead of the insurrection committee or so on. Some people believe that no, he has nothing to do with it. In my opinion, it's even before January 6th, it was obvious that according to Constitution, there has to be a peaceful transfer of power from president who lost election to president who's becoming president, and that he failed Constitution by not delivering the presidency to a new incoming president. Jonathan, what's your opinion on that? How you?
I have no opinion on that.
No, it's not.
I do not want to touch that. I will not touch that. I will not touch that
what?
subject.
I totally agree with you, because we have paid adjudicators, we have Supreme Court, we have state courts, we have all kinds of courts.
This is one time where I just stand back and let the system work, because nothing I say is going to make any difference as far as how the system operates. I have faith in what James Madison referred to when the founding fathers instituted the checks and balances system of our constitutional republic. And James Madison was very prescient when he said, ambition must be made to counteract ambition. In other words, to let the opposing ambitions cancel each other out. And it is better to have indecision in the American political system than to have one side triumph over the other decisively and go off in an unimpeded direction. So the checks and balances system, as far as I'm concerned, is working the way the founding fathers intended it to. And that is where I intend to leave it and not express my opinion as to which. It is not from my right to say which direction the country ought to go in. I could express that individually, but collectively, the system must be allowed to work. And that is, as messy as it appears to people on the outside, it is working.
Totally agree with you, Jonathan. And it's great achievement of American political system that it can provide the balances and counterbalances and go through such a difficult time as where America is. Ivan, I'm pretty sure that people in Kyiv, in Ukraine, they of course don't want Trump to become president again, right?
No way, but actually I've heard an opinion that Trump becoming a president is not a failure scenario for Ukraine as well, because he will gonna to stop this war in one way or other, and if Putin will not go to stop in this war, he will do everything to help Ukraine win it, not give us weapons one by one, but give all the required weapons at once. So, of course, I'm not a fan of such scenario, not a fan of Trump, but
and a lot can happen. A lot can happen between now and the election.
Yeah.
I think, Roman, would you agree that Putin is so fiercely continues to fight simply because he has high hopes of Trump becoming president of the United States?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with this, with the description that this is a war of attrition. Now, yes, Russia has the piles of stock, even T-34 and all these old tanks and equipment that is being utilized. I mean, the point is that, you know, you have this pile of stock that is almost mostly depleted, you know, even though no matter how you look at it, Russia doesn't have that power that they used to have. We have exposed Russia's weakness, and they cannot simply restore the production at the quantities that they wish, simply because their production is heavily dependent on the Western components. We're not even talking about chips and other stuff. We're talking about some even basic components that they cannot produce by themselves. This is where the Russian corruption has really helped everybody else, you know, that they are so corrupt that they have destroyed their own military capability. But that being said, you know, Russia is, of course, expecting that the West is not going to deliver. And they already have seen that in the artillery shells. The European Union had promised 1 million artillery shells, delivered only 300,000. So they have seen that the West is not ready for a full-scale war, and they haven't been for a while. But the Russia is afraid that if European Union, if United States were to scale, now they can scale. Russia cannot scale, but the West can scale pretty fast. And so if they see enough evidence that, you know, this scaling is happening and there is no way that they can catch up, that will be a big blow to their narrative. Now, they are expecting these major shifts in political spectrum, such as, you know, elections in the United States, couple European countries, and they want to see if that shift is going to happen or not. If it's going to happen, then of course they can continue this war and hoping that they will just win this war of attrition. If it doesn't happen, which I actually, you know, Trump is obviously a wild card no matter what, because he's so narcissistic that if Putin really attacks his own ego and people start talking that Trump is a weak president because Putin is basically knocking him over, Trump is crazy enough that he can do something completely unexpected, and meaning something what just provide tons of weapons and do all these other things. So I do think that Russia wants to see how plays out, and that's why I don't foresee the war being over in the next year and a half.
And as strange as it sounds to say and agree, Roman, that Trump's very unpredictability is one of the biggest, ironically, one of the biggest factors in favor of Ukraine. Because if Trump does become president, his very unpredictability is a major factor in deterrence. Because the very thing that you try to avoid is you try to avoid being predictable when you want to deter an opponent.
Exactly. And you remember those bombings of Syria, when out of the blue, he ordered a strike on Syria, something that nobody else has ordered. And we didn't expect that to happen. And so imagine Trump just orders, a bombing of the Black Fleet in the Black Sea, Black Sea Fleet. I mean, I can see this something like this, especially if his ego is damaged enough. And you have to understand that Trump is old. I mean, he's really old. He's like as old as Biden, 3 years difference. I mean, most people don't realize this, but these are two really old presidents. And so, I mean, I wouldn't be completely dismissive of Trump. Of course, he's not my favorite choice for the candidate, for the Republican candidate. But I'm just saying that even the election of Trump is not necessarily going to be the full-fledged disaster for Ukraine.
But when you mentioned Syria, and if you remember what's happened in Syria, there was about 200 Wagner group people. And Trump asked Putin, "Are these your people?" And Putin didn't want to admit that there is a Wagner group operating in Syria. So he says, "No, they're not mine." Trump says, "Oh, wonderful." And then he killed all those 200 people. So after Putin, so if Trump will ask Putin, "Are these people in Ukraine fighting? Are these your people?" No, they're not mine. He will just kill all of them. That would be a wonderful scenario. I think I wouldn't mind. Very interesting.
Sometimes it's better to be. Sometimes it's better to be perceived as crazy.
Yeah,
it was actually a nice scenario for 2014, and it was told that probably it was one of the biggest mistakes of Ukraine not to fight the Russian forces occupying Crimea, because at that time Putin said that there were no Russian forces, and if Ukraine actually was able to start a successful counter terroristic operation, then probably we didn't have this full-scale invasion happen.
Well, remember,
of course, if world was united and supported Ukraine in kicking Russian invaders from Crimea, but it was in past, unfortunately.
Well, I have commentators saying that Putin is admittedly, he is a great tactician. He doesn't plan well ahead, but when something happens and you have to act really fast, he is capable of doing that. And what he's done in Crimea is a perfect example. He assembled an army of so-called little green men, and he denied that they are in fact Russian soldiers. Only several months later, he admitted, "Of course, it was my people, and of course, I directed them to take over Crimea," or so on, when it was already done deal. Okay, so he's not really a great strategist, but when it comes time to act decisively and quickly, he's capable of doing that. But we'll see what's happened. Hopefully, next few days will stop the horrible Russian bombardment of Ukrainian cities, killing a lot of civilians. This is unfortunately what makes this war of attrition different from other war of attrition, like First World War, if you remember, and so on. Because here there is a status quo on the front lines, but yet there are a lot of civilians that are being killed in Ukraine. And I must admit that Ukraine is definitely not waiting passively what's happened. Of course, there are attacks against Belgrade, against Russian Black Sea Fleet, and other targets in Crimea, for example. There are
I say that-
signs.
Yeah, I say that Ukraine is preparing and waiting for the proper moment to throw a decisive counterpunch within
Yeah.
the next 2-3 months.
Yeah, with that, I would like to thank you all for participating in today's program. And I'm looking forward, hopefully, to see you on Friday, same place, same time. Thank you very much, everybody.
Been a
Slava
pleasure.
Ukraini.
Героям слава.
Героям слава. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.